Under the Skin, I'm Michel Faber. The Transporter's Dilemma. Isserly's car hummed quietly as she drove through the Scottish Highlands, the vast landscape stretching out like a canvas of greens and browns, punctuated by the occasional sheep or cow. The road was mostly empty, save for the rare vehicle passing by, and even rarer, a hitchhiker standing by the roadside. On this particular day, the sky was a brooding gray, and the wind carried the promise of rain. Isserly's eyes were sharp, scanning the horizon for her next potential passenger. She wasn't just any driver. She had a mission that required her to be selective, to choose only those who fit certain criteria. Her task was to find suitable male candidates, strong and alone, for an alien operation that harvested human meat for her home planet. As she approached a figure by the road, her mind raced with questions. Was he safe to approach? Did he look like he needed help? Would he complicate her mission? The man was standing awkwardly, his thumb jutting out in the universal sign of a hitchhiker. He was tall, with a mop of unruly hair that danced in the wind and a backpack that looked like it had seen better days. His clothes were worn, but his posture was that of someone who still held on to hope. Isserly slowed the car, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and fear. She rolled down the window and called out, "Need a lift?" The man's face lit up with a grin, revealing a set of teeth that were a little too perfect. "Yes, please. I thought I'd be stuck here forever," he said, his voice tinged with relief. Isserly hesitated for a moment, her instincts telling her something wasn't quite right. But the man's eager expression and the way he looked at her car with wide, hopeful eyes swayed her decision. "Hop in," she said, unlocking the doors. As the man settled into the passenger seat, Isserly couldn't help but notice the way he looked around the car, his gaze lingering on the dashboard, the seats, the little air freshener dangling from the rearview mirror. "Nice car," he commented. "It's so clean." "Thanks," Isserly replied, her voice neutral as she pulled back onto the road. "So, where are you headed?" "Just north," the man said, waving his hand vaguely. "Anywhere is better than being stuck in the middle of nowhere, right?" Isserly nodded, her mind racing with the implications of her decision. She had rules to follow, criteria to meet, and this man, I didn't need. He didn't quite fit the bill. But there was something about him, something that made her want to take a chance. The car ride was filled with small talk, the man sharing stories of his travels, his dreams, and the places he'd seen. Isserly listened, her heart softening with each word. She knew what she had to do, what her job required, but for the first time, she wondered if there was another way, a path that didn't involve the cold, calculated decisions she was used to making. As they neared a secluded stretch of road, Isserly's hand hovered over a hidden button on the dashboard. This was the moment of truth, the point where she would usually incapacitate her passenger, ensuring they met the fate her job dictated. But as she looked at the man beside her, his eyes bright with the joy of adventure, she hesitated. Could she really go through with it? Was this the life she wanted to lead? The man turned to her, his smile fading as he noticed her inner turmoil. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. Isserly took a deep breath, her decision clear. "No, it's not," she admitted. "I can't do this anymore." With those words, Isserly's life changed forever. She bypassed the button, instead pulling over to the side of the road. "I'm sorry," she said. "I can't take you any further." The man looked confused, but there was a spark of understanding in his eyes. "It's okay," he said, reaching for the door handle. "Thank you for the ride, and for being honest." As he stepped out into the cool Highland air, Isserly watched him go, a sense of freedom washing over her. She had broken the rules, defied her duties, and in doing so she had found a glimmer of hope, a chance for a new beginning. The car was silent as she drove away, leaving the hitchhiker behind. But in her heart, Isserly knew she had made the right choice. For the first time in a long time, she felt alive, connected to the world in a way she never had before. And as the road stretched out before her, she realized that her journey was just beginning. The solitude of the highlands. Isserly drove through the snow-dusted roads of the highlands, the vastness of the landscape stretching out around her. She felt a kinship with the land, both outsiders, both misunderstood. A figure trudged along the side of the road, a young man with a rucksack slung over his shoulder. He turned and waved at her passing car. Isserly's grip tightened on the steering wheel. She couldn't stop, not for him. Her mission was too important, her secrets too great. "Why do I feel so guilty?" she whispered to herself, the car's heater doing little to warm her. She thought of the farm, a black farm, a place that held her just as tightly as the human form she wore. The wind carried the faintest sounds of laughter and music from a distant town. She knew there would be no invitation for her, the strange woman who lived on the outskirts of society. She returned to her car, the only place she truly felt in control. As she drove back to the farm, the lights of the town faded behind her. That night, the wind howled outside, a lonely song that matched the turmoil in her heart. She closed her eyes, knowing that tomorrow she would wake up and do it all over again. Because this was her life, and she had a job to do. The escape of the Votzels. In the darkness, the only sound was the distant roar of the sea and the occasional rustle of movement from the farm's outskirts. Isserly, her breath visible in the air, called out to her companion, "Eswis, do you see anything?" Eswis, a seasoned tracker whose sharp eyes missed nothing, replied without turning, "Nothing yet. But they're close." Isserly's mind was on the Votzels, the genetically modified beings central to the alien operation, who had escaped. As she and Eswis, her partner in this unexpected crisis, moved forward, the headlights of their vehicle pierced the darkness. "There, by the old granary," Isserly exclaimed, spotting a figure in the distance. They approached cautiously. The figure, Votzel, was clearly distressed. "Please, I don't want to go back," it pleaded. Isserly, with a calming gesture, assured, "We're not here to harm you." The Votzel, showing a glimmer of understanding, moved toward them. Isserly and Eswis exchanged a look of silent agreement. Their mission had taken an unforeseen turn. As they escorted the Votzel back, the first light of dawn illuminated their path, symbolizing the dawn of a new understanding between species. Isserly knew that their world had irrevocably changed. The ethical harvest. The morning sun barely pierced the thick clouds over Our Black Farm, as Isserly made her way to the massive gate that separated her world from the unsuspecting one outside. She paused, her hand hovering over the lock, the weight of her choices pressing down on her like the heavy air. "Morning, SS." Eswis greeted her, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "Morning," she replied, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The arrival of Amlis Vess interrupted the quiet of the barn. "Isserly," he called out, "we need to talk." She faced him, her expression unreadable. "What is it?" Amlis looked at her intently. "It's about the operation." Isserly's stance was firm. "I'm aware of what we do here." He nodded, acknowledging her position. "Just remember, you have choices." Isserly considered his words, her eyes reflecting the stormy skies above. The ethical harvest was not just about the crops and animals. It was about her own life, her own choices. And as she stood there, she realized that the hardest decisions were often the ones that led to the greatest freedom. Miscommunication and turmoil. Rain pattered against the windshield as Isserly's car sliced through the foggy Scottish Highlands. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. William sat in the passenger seat, his gaze lost in the passing scenery, while Isserly's hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. "So, where are you headed?" Isserly asked, breaking the silence. William chuckled dryly. "Nowhere fast. Maybe the moon, if you can manage that." Isserly's eyes flicked to him, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips despite the heaviness in her heart. "The moon's a bit out of my way." They drove on, the silence returning like an unwelcome guest. Isserly's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. She had been picking up hitchhikers for years, but something about William was different. He seemed as lost as she felt, a kindred spirit adrift in a world that didn't quite fit. "You ever feel like you're just going through the motions?" Isserly asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "All the time," William admitted, his tone reflecting a shared sentiment. The confession hung in the air, and for a moment they shared a connection. Two strangers understanding each other's unspoken pain. When they reached a crossroads, William pointed to a path leading off into the hills. "Drop me here," he said. "I need to walk and clear my head." Isserly pulled over and William got out, pausing to look back at her. "Thanks for the ride, Isserly, and for the talk." She watched him disappear into the mist, feeling a strange sense of loss. As she drove away, Isserly felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, a glimmer of connection that had nothing to do with her mission or survival, a reminder that there were still unexplored paths on the long road ahead. Reflections of humanity. Today was different for Isserly. She had decided to take a detour to confront the nagging thoughts that had been her constant companions. Amlis Vess sat beside her, his gaze fixed on the landscape. It was a look of wonder, a look Isserly had forgotten she could wear. Isserly's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "It's my job," she replied, a mix of defiance and resignation in her voice. Amlis turned to face her. "Is this the life you envisioned for yourself?" he asked. I don't know," she admitted. "I've never allowed myself to think about it." They drove in silence for a moment. Amlis's hand hesitated in the air before resting gently on her shoulder. "It doesn't have to be," he said softly. The touch was electric, a connection that transcended their differences. Isserly pulled over, the car coming to a stop on the side of the road. She turned to Amlis, her eyes searching his. "Maybe it's time for a change," she said, the words feeling like a promise. Amlis smiled and Isserly smiled back. As they sat there, the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the highlands. It was a moment of reflection, and perhaps the beginning of a new journey for Isserly, one where she could finally be free. The decision to depart. The cold Scottish air bit at Isserly's face as she stood outside the van, the keys in her pocket. The dog, a silent witness to her turmoil, whined softly. Isserly opened the van door and the dog bounded out, its tail wagging hesitantly. "Go on then," she said softly. "You're free now." The dog paused, looking back at her with big, sad eyes. "I can't take you with me," she added, her voice thick with emotion. "You need to find your own way." As the dog trotted off into the distance, Isserly felt a pang of loneliness. She turned back to the van, her mind racing with thoughts of her past. A fleeting memory of Amlis surfaced, a moment they shared, a laugh, a look that said more than words ever could. It was these small human interactions that had unknowingly anchored her. She climbed into the driver's seat, the leather cold against her skin. The van started with a rumble, and she drove off, leaving behind the life she had known. The road stretched out before her, a symbol of the new path she was carving for herself, a path of instinct, of newfound courage, and a determination to embrace whatever lay ahead. With each mile, she felt her old identity shedding away, revealing the core of who she was meant to be. The final blaze. Iserly drove along the Anine, her focus sharp as she contemplated her new purpose. After her profound transformation, she was no longer the observer of life's fleeting moments, but an active participant with a clear mission. Her task was to locate the enigmatic Dr. Larch, whose research on the ethereal boundaries between existence and the void could hold the answers to the questions that had haunted her since her change. As the car's steady hum